We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, well, not as always today, I'm flying solo today. Susan's out with a client, so you're stuck with me.
I'm sorry to miss her, but we'll have fun today.
That's right. And so before we get to our special guest, we always have to start off with a quote. And so I have one here from Maya Angelou,
Mm,
and she says, the real difficulty is to overcome how you think about yourself.
mm.
And we'll get more into that. But as you heard, our special guest is here, Tricia Timm, who's a first generation Latina C suite executive thought leader and DEI advocate, and the author of the book. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see behind her, Embrace the Power of You, Owning Your Identity at Work. And you can find out more about the book, or you can buy the book, triciatimm.com. Tricia, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I
Thanks
love
for,
that quote.
yeah. So, what do you think about the quote?
Wow, I actually have a quote in my book from Maya Angelou. I come as one, but stand for 10,000. And I just so thoughtful. And that quote that you just mentioned is really embraces my book. So I might have to steal that, Rob.
That's my gift, is finding great quotes.
Yes, beautiful.
And so we are going to talk a little bit about that. But before that, let's hear a little bit more about yourself and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. As you mentioned, I'm a first generation Latina. I've worked in Silicon Valley for over 25 years in high tech, mostly with software companies. I've been the general counsel of many companies, from startups to large multinational global corporations. My last role was as general counsel and executive sponsor of DEI at Looker, which was a data analytics company, which we sold in 2020 to Google for 2.6 billion. Currently, I serve on the board of directors of a company called Salsify out of Boston, and they're an enterprise software company which helps brands and retailers win on the digital shelf. I serve on three nonprofit boards, and as you mentioned, I just wrote my first book. On the personal side, because I think that helps give context to a little bit of my story and leadership. My mother is from El Salvador, and my father is from Ecuador. I was born in Los Angeles, but quickly my parents moved us out of the city into the accompanying suburbs to really get a better education. The story is very typical of the immigrant story of wanting a better life for our family, and they wanted us to get a better education. So we moved there, but quickly found myself as one of the few Latino families in our particular school. So that I think framed a lot of who I became today.
So let's talk about that. When you say, obviously, part of your book is about embracing the power of you, and there's vulnerability and there's self acceptance as part of this. Do you want to talk about, what was that journey like for you?
It's a journey that has taken me many years, really, as an adult to unpack because I didn't really know, what I was just surviving. And, my family, they had strong Spanish accents, discriminated against for being Latino. And they wanted to spare us from that pain. And so they would encourage me to really downplay where I was from. At the time in the 70s, we were in a civil war. El Salvador was in a civil war. So there was a lot of controversy around that particular country at the time. And so my parents didn't want me to be at the effect of that. And they really encouraged me to blend in, assimilate, really be as American as I could be. And so I did that as a child and continued to do that as an adult. And the challenge with that, I mean, in some ways, it helped, to be honest, right? It helped being part of the majority and blending in and with the privileges that come with that. But over time, really not bringing your entire identity into the workplace it becomes exhausting over time and really takes a toll, I think, on somebody.
And so how did you start embracing the power of you?
I know it was a slow journey. Like I said, I don't know that I even realized I was doing this. It was the armor that I sort of put on to survive in the corporate world. Not only was I the only Latina in the room, but also being a woman in my particular industry, enterprise software, was very male dominated as I was coming up through the ranks. So I had sort of those two dual identities that were making it challenging for me. So I think, I adapted well. I have the skill set, but as I mentioned, I think over a period of time, I realized I can't do that anymore. So um, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the why. Why was I doing this? Unpacking, what the message of, what messages I was receiving that made me think that I was not good enough to be in the room, and dealing with imposter syndrome and the like. And really took one step at a time of embracing little pieces of my identity, revealing it slowly in places where I felt comfortable, and realizing over time that my unique lived experience is actually quite valuable. It's actually a gift for a lot of different reasons, in terms of my ability to have empathy, my ability to have resilience, my ability to see others and their lived experiences, and my ability to have a voice for a group of people that are, growing in our country, that have a lack of representation in the highest positions of leadership. So over time, it wasn't a fast journey for me. It took many years, and I'm frankly still on that journey.
And it's always a journey, right? And
Yeah.
I always love to ask the question to folks is, who are you? And the answer to that is always changing.
Yeah.
And I guess for you is how can, like, I'm sure, I mean, I think the stat is 70% of people experience imposter syndrome, but I do believe it's everyone depending on the context. Um, like, how do people start to identify these patterns where they're not feeling good enough, or they're experiencing imposter syndrome? And then if they identify those, what do you think they should do?
Well, I think you just nailed it, Rob, with when they identify it. I think it takes a really long time to even recognize that you're doing this, and it's this negative self-talk where all of a sudden, there are voices and little messages in your head that you start realizing you're saying, "Oh, that email I sent was." Not good enough, or I don't have the qualifications. They're going to think I'm a fraud in the room. They're not going to believe that I have all these different things that you're saying to yourself, which you may not realize that you're saying. So step one is really recognizing that you're saying these messages to yourself. And two, there are a number of different strategies you can use to combat imposter syndrome. One is what I try to do is it's called mental time travel, which is sort of providing distance between your now moment and the future. So, for example, if in the now moment you're thinking, "I'm not good enough," you think, "Well, how am I going to feel about this situation or this decision in a week, in a month, in a year, in 10 years?" And once you distance yourself from that moment, it lightens it up. It gives it a little bit of perspective and doesn't feel as heavy. So that's one strategy I use. And two is really thinking about, and honestly, for me, like I even made a list of what are all the things that I've done in my career and life, like listing out the accomplishments that you've done, because oftentimes with imposter syndrome, you over focus on your limitations and not give credit to your accomplishments. And so either listing them out or reaching out to a mentor or a partner that can remind you of, hey, look, you've, led this company, you have a, master's, you have, all this, litany of things that you've done to sort of almost remind you and convince you that, yes, you belong in that room.
Yeah, that one's very similar. We have an exercise we call it "I can because I did," and it's
Yeah.
basically the same thing. It's you can do this, or you can be in this room because X, Y, and Z. And the other thing you mentioned was like tuning into the voice or the voices inside your head. And this is last week's episode with Sonny Strasberg. We were talking a little bit about IFS therapy, and it has this concept of parts. And so we all have many parts.
Yeah, we do.
And they speak to us in different ways. And
Yeah.
the ones that are criticizing us or judging us or shaming us, these are protector parts that are trying to protect you from the pain you felt as a child.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just about noticing them, acknowledging them, giving compassion to them for that protection, and
Yeah.
then tuning back into self where you can make the best decision for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that work, and I do a lot of that work, and that's part of the unpacking that I had to do was really unpack all the messages and harm that that happened to me as a young person, and over time, I think as in my particular case of being able to, let's say pass as white in the workplace, subjected me to be in spaces where my ethnicity was, talked down upon. And so I heard these messages, and that really creates trauma for somebody. So that created more fear to really reveal this part of myself, because I thought I it wasn't just a story that I thought people might have this perception of me. I actually heard it. And so the fear of being looked as lesser than, unqualified, and losing the credibility I had gained in my profession, or even the network that I had built over decades, was a real fear. And really sort of letting that go, and like you said, just really loving that young kid in me that put up this armor to protect herself.
Absolutely. And as you did that, your impact has only grown. And
Yes.
you sent me that message from, I believe it was someone who listened to your radio interview. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful moment, and it reminds me of the importance of being visible as a Latina who's made it to the different ranks of leadership. So I was doing this radio interview, really about my book, and a college student had come by to film it for social media, and she was a first generation Latina, and just hearing my story, I keep hearing this a lot from Latinas, that they say to me, your story is my story. And I haven't seen, like literally seen, anyone like me in leadership, and just seeing you inspires me that I can do it too. And that to me, it fuels me to sort of continue this work, because when I did my career, I saw no one that looked like me. I had no role model. I didn't know. I felt very othered. My cultural and lived experiences were different than those around me. So I had no playbook. And so I hope to inspire people that were like me, that there is a role model, there is a path, and that they can be what they want to be.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I'm, I feel like a vehicle for change in that regard.
How are you going to increase that impact that you're having?
Well, I wrote this book, and the reason I wrote this book was for that very reason. I had no plans, and oftentimes people say, "Oh, do you know what you're going to do in your career or life?" And writing a book was not one of them. And it's, by the way, it's hard to write a book. But what my last job at Looker, I the Latinx group had asked me to tell my story during National Hispanic Heritage Month. And prior to that, I really hadn't told my story, not only, to a group of employees, but really to my managers and peers. And so it was a really difficult, sort of challenging moment for me to be super vulnerable. But I did it. And in that moment, there were Latinas in the group. There were tears, Rob. There were hugs. There were people that emailed me, just saying what a difference it made, and the impact of just telling my story in that moment. I remember coming home and telling my husband, "My life changed today. I have a new purpose, and I got to figure out what that is." And then this book idea came to mind, and so that's how I'm going to make an impact, because just that one college student that said, "I now believe I can do what I can do," is changing the trajectory of one life. And so I think with each person that I can reach, I can make a difference.
I love it. Now, I wanted to ask you this because you're big in the tech world, and it's also, what's been going on recently. We saw Silicon Valley layoffs of, I think it was 120,000 people, and a lot of leaders out there that are listening and that I connect with, they're kind of uncertain about, like, one is like where their company's going to be, or even themselves, like, am I going to have a job?
Yeah.
Like, do you have any advice for those people? Let's start off with the ones who are worried about their own career, and then we can move to the companies.
Yeah, it's a tough time. I've lived through a couple of recessions in my career, and it's, I think we have to acknowledge that it's a very scary time for people when they are losing their jobs or fear losing their jobs, particularly if they're the sole breadwinner. So I think, if should you find yourself in that situation, I think like anything in life, it's a mindset. Can you have a mindset where you find this as an opportunity to find the role or the company you've always wanted? I know in my career, I often just took the next job and without really being very intentional about the kind of company I wanted to be in or the kind of role I wanted to be in. So I think taking the opportunity to really have a blank slate and just think intentionally, what role do you want? What industry do you want to be in? What company do you want to work for? And instead of what I should do, I think is a good exercise, because it opens up opportunities for us to pursue things that we really care about and feel purposeful about. And then once you sort of figure out what that is, I really believe in the value of your network, and let everybody what you're looking for, what kind of job what it looks like. Ask for introductions. Every single job that I got really was out of a genuine, authentic relationship I had built over time. That's where opportunities come from. So even if that particular person may not have an opportunity today, cultivating relationships, and maybe this is a time where you can just spend time, going to lunch, doing a Zoom meeting, and really genuinely investing time in those relationships, because opportunities come from your network.
I love that advice. And like, obviously you're on a bunch of boards. And so how are you coaching or like helping the leaders navigate, what's the potential we lose business or economic downturn or whatever that, like, how are you coaching them to stay on track?
As you can probably tell by now, Ra, I really believe in mindset. And I think that
So do we.
yeah, that's why this is great. So I think there is a difference between an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. And when you are in a mindset of abundance, you are in the driver's seat. So you see challenges as opportunities. You are, instead of being overwhelmed or angry or frustrated, you're open and curious and excited about potential growth. If you look at research, you'll see that some of the best companies are born out of times like this, because it's those leaders that can do more with less. And so if you can go into these times thinking, how can we be more efficient, laser focused on strategic priorities, and excited about potential opportunities, I think you can navigate these times really well. And it's really trying to avoid that scarcity mindset being at the effect of having, believing that you don't have enough, or you're the victim of something, or you don't have choices. I think that's where leaders can fail.
Absolutely. And ultimately, I think where we started about self-acceptance impacts both of these, right? Is
Mhm.
I literally got off a call with a client a few hours ago, and she's struggling with the, what if I lose my job? Who am I?
Yes. That happened to me. That's such a great. So, oftentimes we attribute our worth to our job. And when I I was a general counsel of another company years ago. I remember I decided to take a break because I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I was sort of frustrated with things. And whenever I would go to like a dinner party, or some people would say, "So, what do you do?" And that question of what do you do, right? And it's like, oh, that's okay. I have to tell you, or where do you work? And it's so tied up to your identity. And when I decided to be a consultant for a while, I somehow, the being a general counsel feels so powerful and big and worthy. And for whatever reason in my mind, being a consultant didn't feel as big. And so I always tried to sort of justify, like, I'm choosing this, and so I think like separating your worth and value from your job is a real benefit, and really focusing on the value and contributions you're making no matter what your job is. I mean, right now I'm pivoting to be an author and speaker, which I don't know if people contribute worth to that versus being an executive or board member. But to me, because I'm fully grounded and excited about what this is going to do in the world, I feel very worthy of it. So,
And it ceases to matter because of the impact you're having.
yeah, exactly.
And that's where folks need to be, right? And like underneath that, and I had the same thing actually when I was laid off. And I went to a few conferences in between before I got another job, and people were like, "Where you work?" And I was like, "Nowhere." And you feel that shame, and it's like, that was pre my work, but
Yeah.
it's like now I know where that's coming from. And
Yeah.
like the first time Susan asked me, like, "Who are you?" I said, like, "Well, I'm an engineer. I'm a water polo player, and I went to MIT." Like those are my who am I? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, that's not you at all. That's just
Right.
like, right. And I think that's where folks need to be in this uncertainty is like, well, if I'm confident in who I am and I accept myself, then I can deliver as best as I can, and the rest will shake out.
Absolutely. And the core message of my book is belonging begins with self acceptance. And a lot of times I get, I mentor a lot of female leaders, and often what the question comes up is, how can I get executive presence? I keep being told I don't have executive presence, and and they're at the effect of others of not, believing that they're executives, and it begins with you. If you walk into a room confident and believing and that what you're about to contribute is important, then those around you will believe it too. But if you're walking in the room with doubts and not believing you belong there, people can read on that. So now it's easy to say those words. It's hard to get to that place, but that it starts with self-acceptance.
Totally. And that's like if we go back to the IFS framework, is once we're leading by self,
Yeah.
we get the 8 C's, which is confidence, clarity, like all these things. And it's like, that is, I mean, it's not executive presence, it's presence.
Presence. Yeah, you're right. It is just presence. You're right.
And that energy that you emit it changes people around you. And there's no other way to say it. Like, I would love to say like, oh, there's some science thing and like, this is this, but it's like, it literally just impacts people differently.
Well, and you know it when you see it. When someone walks into the room, no matter who they are, and they fully own and embrace who they are, you love them, right? You love, that person and the charisma and the positive nature of who they are. So it does emit. I mean, it really does. It's energy that just emits.
I love it. And you talked a little bit about belonging, and you say, and like you're doing some work in DEI. Like, how do these all tie together? Like the self-acceptance, the belonging, and then creating an environment where folks can feel like they belong as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that they both have to happen. I think as an individual, in order to get a sense of belonging, you have to really achieve self-acceptance so that you feel comfortable bringing your authentic self into the workplace. And that's a journey. And that's, the purpose of my book is to help people through that journey to get on the other side of their fears, to show up authentically. On the flip side, you can be showing up authentically, but if the workplace is not accepting of that authenticity, then that might be a difficult place to be. And so I really work and want to work with leaders to think about an inclusive mindset and what are the things that they're doing within their workplace and how they're leading to make sure that they're including other perspectives, other identities. They're recognizing their blind spots. They're curious. They're non-judgmental, and that's a practice. We all have to practice it. I still, find blind spots, make mistakes, and I think that this work around DEI, and one of the things I try to coach leaders on is we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. This is not a place to be judged. It's a place to learn. And I can tell you, because I can live in both spaces, those from underrepresented communities are really welcoming of someone that just says, look, I messed up. How can I be better? Rather than maybe doing nothing at all. And I think oftentimes DEI, when it can be scary to navigate these spaces. And so people might be frozen and just prefer not to do anything because they're afraid of getting it wrong. But I would say, like, it's better for you to try and learn and work at it than doing nothing.
It's the power of mindset again.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And it's stepping into the growth mindset and then also just accepting yourself that you will make mistakes, but if you're showing that you care, that's what lands with people. Yeah.
Empathy. I mean, all of this is around empathy, having empathy and caring. And one of the things I say in my book is, at the end of the day, people just want to feel seen and heard. That's it. That's it. If people feel seen and heard, then you can create relationships, move beyond challenges. And that's amazing how hard that is for people to really realize. Yeah.
And so do you have any advice if, let's say, leaders are out there and they hear that and they're like, I want to bring more of that? How can they get to a place where, they're helping to see and hear their people?
I think you mentioned growth mindset. I think it's really important. So being curious about things that are outside of your normal bubble, expanding your circles. There's a great exercise I've done with D&I leaders around just examining your social circles. And if you really look at your friends and then you look at religion, sexual identity, gender, political views, what does it look like? Does it all look the same, or do you have diversity? And if you generally, we tend to navigate towards people that are more like us. So recognizing that, okay, maybe you do have some blind spots, and the workplace is a great place. It's becoming more diverse, and it's a great place to build relationships with people that might be different than you, and learn about them. Because at the end of the day, when you start getting to know people, we're so much more the same than we are different. And so some of the stories that we might have created from media or culture or whatever, they start, getting broken down because you see people as humans, and not as whatever story you might have created around it. So one, I would say, is curiosity. A real practical step in a meeting would be, if you tend to see a conversation being dominated by one particular thought, instead of the one person that usually has the diverse thought or a different thought having to raise their hand every time, ask the group, okay, we're hearing one opinion, I want the group to give me a different opinion. What is something different from what we're talking about, which invites the entire group to think differently, rather than just one person having to come to the table with their different thought. So again, just sort of looking and recognizing where you can include people that might have different perspectives.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Tricia, wrapping up here, just with our hard-hitting questions. If you had one thing that you'd like to say to our community of leaders, what would that be?
I would say embrace change. I think we've all had to live through the pandemic over the last couple of years. We now are, in some may call a recession or not, but we're in a time of, reducing and layoffs, as you mentioned. We have multiple generations in our workforce. We are now working with hybrid or remote workforce. There is so much change that is coming to a leader right now. And I think that the mindset of embracing change, being agile leader, having empathy for these situations, will really propel you as a leader and your company through these challenging times. I think if you're stuck in the right or wrong, or this is how we used to do it, or when I was coming up through the ranks, I always did X. I think that mindset is going to be challenging because we've got a different workforce, and we also have, my daughter's 20, and that generation, they're coming to the workforce with a very different mindset and demands and perspectives, which I admire and love. And I think she really helps me grow and to see what that generation is going to want out of the workforce. So I think agility is really important.
I love that. And maybe on that note, obviously a lot of folks struggle with Gen Zs coming into the workforce. Do you have any advice for those leaders?
I think get to know them. As I said, I think I'm learning so much from my daughter. And oftentimes we, in my generation, say, well, this is the better way to do it. And when you sit down and you see how they may be viewing the world, how they use technology, how they multitask, I often say there's no way you can be paying attention on this project when you have the phone and you got and it's like, what, that generation grew up multitasking. That's how they do things. And then maybe it's not the way I excel, but maybe that's the way they do it. So, I think just being curious and learning and embracing it rather than trying to dictate is important.
I love it. And we kind of talked a little bit about it, but what do you want your legacy to be with all the stuff that you're doing?
I really, it's a great question. And I've writing the book has made me think about my legacy much more, I think, than I would have otherwise. And I touched on it earlier. I think I'd like my legacy to be that I have helped those that feel like an other in the workplace, who are struggling to belong, that I help them unpack some of those feelings, give them the tools and strategies to get on the other side of that fear so that they can show up in the workplace as their true selves. I think that will not only make them happier people, but it's an enormous benefit to us and our society to have those perspectives in the room. I think that if people are coming in conforming, we're not going to be hearing the amazing, innovative ideas that can come from people's lived experiences. We won't be addressing our communities that are underrepresented because we're not hearing that voice in the room. And we won't be seeing ourselves in media and in books and in other things because we're not allowing them to fully show themselves. So I think if I can make the slight change with that and encourage more people to come into the space and leaders to create a space for them to show up, I think we'll all benefit.
I love it. And for folks out there, so the book is Embrace the Power of You. You can find it triciatimm.com, Tim, Timm, so 2 M's. We've dropped the link in the podcast notes. I've also dropped Tricia's LinkedIn in the podcast notes so you can connect with her there. Is there anywhere else you'd like folks to find you?
Those are the best spots. My 20-year-old's helping me with Instagram and Facebook, but I'm a little bit challenged on that. And that's another place I'm embracing. And she's telling me I need to be on TikTok. So we'll see.
That's right. Yeah, Susan's experimenting with TikTok. I have not dipped my toe in the water yet, but we'll see. So absolutely, yeah. So folks out there, connect with Tricia on LinkedIn, and obviously you can check out the book, Embrace the Power of You. Obviously, for us, if you like this episode, please hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform and share it with any leaders in your life or other folks that you think would love to hear this discussion. And then obviously for all things leadership development, conflict management, psych safety, and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com for all of that stuff there. Tricia, wrapping up here, is there anything you'd like to leave with our leaders today?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I would say, look for that high potential leader that, maybe from an underrepresented community or identity. We need more mentors and sponsors helping those leaders. So, keep your eye out for them and embrace that growth mindset.
I love it. And for me, obviously, Tricia, has been amazing to chat with you. And I have a quote here from Shannon Ables, and she says, "What self-acceptance does is open up more possibilities of succeeding because you aren't fighting yourself along the way."
I love that, Rob. I got to take these quotes. That's beautiful. It's very true. Great way to wrap it up.
And yeah, that's what we've said all along, right? Is self-acceptance unlocks your ability to navigate these difficult situations that we're in with, people's jobs and uncertainty. And even it allows you to open up space as a leader for these spaces where other folks can come to the table and share themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's good for you. That's good for them. That's good for everyone. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'd like folks to be at, is start to cultivate that inner voice and just be aware of what's going on inside your head, because the more you're aware, the better you'll be. Tricia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all next week.